We've come a long way with stacking and packing hair since Helen Shaw introduced the bubble puppy. This is a spun deer hair bass fly. I'm using the recipe from The Founding Flies by Mike Valla. I am tying it on a number 6 hook. This is a 2x long. I'm using 2 black hackle feathers for the tail. I'll lay them on top of the shank together and hopefully we'll keep them upright. Wrap those butt ends in, and then by putting them with their shiny sides together, then they flare apart to create the tail of this bass fly. The recipe calls for yellow deer. I don't have any yellow deer. And since Art Flick says that you can tie this in any color you want, and that it ought to be tied to best suit the waters where it is fished, and because I have green hair, I'm going to tie it in green. So I have a bunch of hair that I've already pre-stacked, cleaned and pre-stacked, and I'm going to tie it with those tips of the hair out over the tail. Because I'm using green hair, I'm using green thread as well. I'll do a couple of loose wraps, and then I'll hold the tails in place and let that spin. And it's getting caught, obviously, because it's long underneath of the hook shank and at the back of the hook here. That's okay, we'll just help it around. Get that to flare and spin properly so that I have that skirt all the way around my shank. And I'll take a few more wraps and then zigzag through that hair and get my thread up in front of it and push back on that hair to get it to all lean backwards. Pull out those tails there, or what's going to be a collar actually. And I will snip off another pinch of deer from my skin. Fan the butt ends and pull out all the short stuff. And then I'm going to switch hands here so I can grab the butts with my left hand, and then I will trim off the tips, and then I will set that clump on top of my shank and do 2 loose wraps over the middle of it, and then cinch down and let it spin. And let that all spin up, and then I will take my finger, I'm going to grab the back of the hook, the fly, at the bend with one hand, my left hand, and take my right fingernails and push back on that and get it to pack together. Now this is not a really tightly packed popper as we would create a popper now, and it is all one color and not stacked with all the fancy colors and everything. But in keeping with tying classic and original flies, I'm going to keep this style. Take another clump of hair, clean it out, clip the tips, bring my thread out in front, wrap halfway through that, a couple of loose wraps, let it spin, and just keep wrapping, and then it'll completely spin all the way around. And I want to just keep doing that until I've got the body built up out to the front of the hook. Bring my thread out in front. Get another clump. Clean out the short stuff inside and the bottom. Switch hands. Trim the points off. Couple of loose wraps. And then let it spin. Push back on everything. Hold the hook at the back. Push back. Pack it together. And just clip, clean, and repeat, right? Clip, clean, make a mess. Clipping off the tips. I don't need all those tips for when I end up clipping the body, but then it also helps me make sure that I know the difference between the body and the collar. Couple of loose wraps, let it spin. Push back on that, come up in front again, and looks like I have room for at least one more. So the length of the body is really going to be determined by how long the hook shank is. So grab that by the tips, fan it, pull out the short stuff from underneath. Change hands because it's easier to cut with my right hand. Although I can do it with the left, it's just kind of a pain. Put that out on top of the end of the hook there. Couple of easy wraps and then let it spin. Then I think I'm good for the front. Art Flick then suggests one more step here, and this would be very similar then to the way we would do stacking today, is to just make a flat spot up on top right there at the end, because the last clump is not going to spin, it's just going to be on top so that you produce that slanted popper end on it. So I'll grab one more clump of hair, grab the tips, fan it out, pull out all the under short stuff. Change hands so I can clip off the tips. And then this one I don't want to spin, so I'm going to just set it right here on top where I've created that flat spot. And I'm going to hold it in, do a couple wraps on it, and then I'm going to cinch down on it, but hold it in place while I pull down and let it flare. And then wrap up over it a couple times, and then bring my thread up in front. Push back on everything, hold the back of the hook, push back on it so I expose the eye, and bring that thread up in front, up at the eye. You can already see how I've kind of got that angle on the front. I do have a tool called a hair packer that I could be using as well to push back on everything. What I am going to use it for at this point is to throw some half hitches on the front for my knot. So I'll just do a half hitch to start with to keep it in place, and then I'll do a number of double half hitches. So a double half hitch, I'm winding my thread around my tool twice, putting that over the eye of the hook and pulling my thread through. So I have a double half hitch, and let's do 3 of those. Be sure to use a thread that's strong enough that's not going to break when you pull on it to spin the hair. So then I will just go ahead and take my scissors and reach in there and push it against the thread. And then I'm going to trim this all, and for the sake of the video, I'm just going to leave it in the vise so that the trimming can be seen. I'm going to turn it over first and trim out the bottom. Trim that out pretty flat on the bottom. Now what I'm watching for here at the back is not to trim the collar. I do want to trim out anything that's got square ends on it. And what's going to happen is that the body of the fly is going to be primarily on the top, with the bottom closer to the shank, because I want to make sure that there's room between the fly and the hook point. The intent is to fish this. And then I'll just go ahead and give this a haircut and give it that kind of rounded popper look. Come back here and trim off these long ends, making sure to get all of the blunt ends. And then just shape it up nice. Still have some blunts here I need to take out. Okay, let's take a look at the bottom. Get it nice and even. Now what I want to do is to have an angle here in the front to create that popping when it's fished. Kind of broad on the side here. Just it's a matter of being patient and clipping it out to give it a nice shape. Looks like I've got quite a lopsided body now. I'm gonna see if I can even that out a little bit. Might have cut a little bit too much on the other side. I think we're going to be okay. And I still have a few, at least one there, of those blunt end. Don't want any blunt ends, I just want that all tip, all just points for that collar off the tail. Of course, the option too, and what we mostly do now, is to do this with a razor blade. But, I'm tying it old school with the scissors and no separate colors. It's interesting that I wasn't able to find a lot of information on the internet about this particular popper. We've got a whole bunch of the more contemporary ones with the multiple colors that were really introduced and popularized by Mike George. But just this single color one that's called the Bubble Pup, I didn't see a lot of information about it. Couldn't find any other videos about it. I did find one website where they had one of Helen Shaw's actual flies that she had tied for sale in a display. Artflick says that it's supposed to be lacquered then on the front, and I don't have lacquer. We really don't. I suppose there are some people that still use lacquer on their flies. Most of us use a number of other things, UV resin or something else, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it upside down, and I'm just going to drip a bunch of diluted goop on the front end of this fly. And the whole idea with diluted goop is that the xylene evaporates and leaves the goop. So it'll have that kind of rubbery end on it when it evaporates and dries. And my tail twisted a little bit there, but I think we're going to be okay with that. So in green, Helen Shaw's Bubble Pup.